Morning along the coast begins before the merchant ever steps outside. The sea has already shifted twice in the night, leaving its mark along the shoreline in the form of damp sand and darkened wood. By the time the merchant rises, the tide has settled into a gentle movement, slow and steady, pressing softly against the posts that line the small dock. The merchant's lodging sits close to the water, near a storehouse built of thick planks and stone. Inside, the air holds a faint trace of salt, carried in through open shutters the night before. Clothing is chosen for warmth and practicality. A layered tunic, a heavier outer garment, boots suited for uneven ground. There is no need for haste. The day will unfold according to the arrival of boats and the quiet demands of goods that must be seen to. Outside, the dock lies mostly empty. A few small vessels rest in the water, tied securely, their hulls rocking gently with the tide. Ropes creak softly where they strain against their knots. Gulls perch along the edge of the pier, watching the water below with unblinking attention. The merchant walks the length of the dock without interruption, taking note of what has changed since the previous evening. One barrel has shifted slightly, nudged by wind or tide. A length of rope hangs lower than it should. These things are corrected calmly, without frustration. Order here is not about precision, but about familiarity. At the storehouse door, the merchant pauses, keys retrieved from beneath a fold of cloth. The lock opens with a muted sound, and the heavy door swings inward. Inside, the space is cool and dim. Barrels line the walls, marked with symbols rather than words. Salted fish, dried goods, cloth awaiting exchange. The scent inside is layered. Wood, brine, old rope, wax, and the faint sharpness of preserved goods. The merchant moves through the space slowly, checking seals, pressing a palm against the lid of a barrel to ensure it has not loosened overnight. A crate of cloth is uncovered briefly, the fabric lifted and smooth before being covered once more. Everything remains as it should. Outside, the light has strengthened. The sea reflects the sky in broken patterns, ripples catching the sun in shifting fragments. The merchant steps back onto the dock and sets a small scale on a low table, along with a ledger bound in worn leather. These are arranged carefully, not because they will be needed immediately, but because preparation is part of the work. A small boat approaches from farther down the coast, its sail lowered, its movement slow and deliberate. The merchant watches its progress without impatience. Boats arrive when the sea allows. Nothing is gained by urging them otherwise. While waiting, the merchant tends to smaller tasks. A stack of crates is adjusted to keep them clear of the damp boards. A piece of chalk is used to refresh a faded marking on one barrel. A coil of rope is rewound, its fibers aligned neatly. Each motion is measured, conserving energy for later in the day. The approaching boat draws closer, its hull cutting softly through the water. When it reaches the dock, it is secured with practiced ease. No raised voices accompany the arrival. A brief exchange of nods acknowledges the delivery. The merchant steps forward to inspect the cargo. Fish packed in salt, wrapped carefully to preserve freshness. The goods are weighed, the scale balancing evenly. Numbers are noted in the ledger, written slowly, each mark deliberate. The merchant listens to the sound of water beneath the dock while working, the quiet movement grounding the moment. Once the exchange is complete, the goods are carried into the storehouse and placed where they will remain until needed. The merchant closes the door again, locking it securely, then returns to the dock. By now, more of the village has begun to stir. Smoke rises from chimneys farther inland. A few villagers pass along the shore, carrying baskets or tools. They greet the merchant quietly, without lingering. Everyone here understands the rhythm of the morning. The merchant takes a moment to sit on the edge of the dock, feet dangling just above the water. From here, the sea stretches outward, wide and patient. The surface glimmers softly, broken by the slow passage of distant boats. This pause is not indulgence. It is part of the work. Watching the water, noting changes in wind or tide that will shape the rest of the day. Trade depends on timing as much as goods. As the sun climbs higher, the dock warms beneath the merchant's boots. The morning's coolness gives way to a gentler air. Another boat will arrive later. More goods will need sorting. For now, the merchant remains still, attentive, letting the quiet settle before the day continues. The coastal trade is not loud or hurried. It is built on observation, preparation, and trust in the patterns that have always governed the sea. And as the morning draws toward midday, the merchant rises once more, ready to continue the work as it comes. By the time the sun reaches its higher place above the water, the dock no longer feels empty. The light now spreads evenly across the planks, warming the wood and drawing faint scents upward from the sea below. The merchant has returned to steady movement, guided by what the tide allows and what the village quietly requires. By midday, the harbour has settled into a steady rhythm, where arrivals are measured and the water carries fewer surprises. From the dock, the merchant can see far enough to know which boats are worth waiting for and which will pass without stopping. A narrow vessel approaches from the north, riding low in the water. Its sail bears the familiar stitching of a neighbouring settlement. The merchant retrieves the ledger again, resting it on the table where sunlight now falls across the page. Ink dries more quickly at this hour, and writing becomes easier. As the boat ties off, its crew unloads bundles wrapped tightly in oilcloth. The merchant examines the seals carefully, checking for dampness or loosened knots. The goods are not hurried inside. They are assessed where the light is strongest, where flaws reveal themselves without effort. Salted herbs, cured skins, small quantities of resin. Nothing rare, but everything useful. The merchant weighs each bundle, listens to the soft shift of contents within, and notes their condition. Trade here is not about spectacle. It is about consistency. Goods must arrive as expected and leave in the same state. Nearby, the water laps against the dock's supports. Its sound constant but never distracting. The merchant has learned to work with this background, letting it anchor attention rather than pull it away. Once the exchange is complete, payment is settled quietly. There is no counting aloud. Trust is established through repetition, not words. The merchant records the transaction, closes the ledger, and places it safely beneath the table. The goods are carried into the storehouse in small trips, each bundle placed according to its nature. Items sensitive to heat are set farther from the door. Heavier materials are stacked low. The merchant moves through the space with ease, memory guiding placement more than markings. Outside, the village path near the dock sees more traffic now. A woman carrying woven baskets pauses briefly to watch the activity before continuing on. A child follows the shoreline, collecting smooth stones where the tide has receded. These moments pass without interaction, yet they are noticed. The merchant steps back into the open air, stretching shoulders stiffened from lifting. The sea reflects the midday sky in pale blue and silver, broken occasionally by the shadow of passing birds. Farther out, a larger ship moves slowly across the horizon, its destination unclear. Such ships are observed carefully. Their arrival can change the rhythm of the day. Today, this one does not turn toward the village. The merchant watches until it fades into distance, then returns focus to what remains close at hand. At midday, tasks turn inward. The merchant retrieves a small knife and begins repairing worn cords on several sacks. Each cut is precise, each knot tied with practiced efficiency. These repairs ensure that goods remain intact through future journeys. Small failures at sea can become costly by shore. The sun climbs higher, and with it, the warmth. The merchant adjusts clothing slightly, loosening an outer layer. A breeze carries inland scents, wood smoke, damp earth, mixing with the ever-present salt. Another boat arrives unexpectedly, smaller than the others, its hull marked with signs of long use. Its cargo is modest, pottery wrapped in straw, carefully packed to prevent breakage. The merchant attends to the boat and inspects each piece, turning them gently, listening for cracks hidden beneath glaze. Satisfied, the merchant accepts the goods and directs them to a shaded corner of the storehouse. Another boat arrives unexpectedly, smaller than the others, its hull marked with signs of long use. Its cargo is modest, pottery wrapped in straw, carefully packed to prevent breakage. The merchant inspects each piece, turning them gently, listening for cracks hidden beneath glaze. Satisfied, the merchant accepts the goods and directs them to a shaded corner of the storehouse. Pottery, unlike fish or cloth, must remain undisturbed. It waits, silent and fragile, until needed elsewhere. When midday arrives, with it comes mealtime. Meals are simple yet satisfying. The merchant steps aside briefly, retrieving bread and dried fish wrapped earlier. Sitting on a low crate near the water, the merchant eats without rush, eyes still scanning the dock. Trade does not pause entirely, even during rest. Between bites, the merchant watches the tide begin its subtle shift. The waterline creeps closer to the dock's edge, reclaiming sand and smoothing footprints left earlier in the day. This change signals how much time remains before certain boats must depart. When the meal is finished, the merchant wipes hands clean and returns to work. A stack of crates needs rearranging to allow airflow. A lid is tightened on a barrel whose seal has softened slightly in the heat. These adjustments are small but necessary. Midday is also a time for conversation, though it remains sparse. A fisherman pauses to ask about supplies expected later in the week. The merchant answers honestly, offering what certainty exists and acknowledging what depends on weather. As the sun begins its slow descent, the light shifts once again. Shadows stretch across the dock, altering familiar shapes. The merchant takes note of what remains unfinished, organizing tasks by urgency rather than preference. One final boat arrives just before the tide turns fully. Its arrival is deliberate, timed to avoid grounding. The merchant assists briefly with securing the ropes, hands steady against the rough fibers. The cargo is light, documents sealed against moisture, meant for inland travel. These are accepted with care and placed apart from heavier goods. Paper, even protected, carries its own risks near water. The merchant ensures they remain dry, shielded from stray spray or shifting air. With the tide now moving steadily, departures begin. Boats untie and drift away, their wakes soft and brief. The dock grows quieter once more. The merchant stands at the edge, watching the water carry the day forward. Midday has passed not with ceremony, but with steady purpose. Goods have been moved. Agreements have been honored. The sea has been listened to. As time passes on, the merchant turns back toward the storehouse, preparing for the slower hours ahead, when sorting replaces exchange and reflection takes its place beside labor. The later hours of the afternoon arrive with a quieter confidence, when the harbor's earlier uncertainty has thinned into something more dependable. The coastal merchant does not mark this change by the sun, but by how the dock behaves underneath. The planks no longer tremble with constant arrivals, and the water laps with a steadier rhythm against the pilings. This is the portion of the day devoted not to anticipation, but to completion. The merchant begins by reviewing what has already passed through careful hands. Goods traded earlier are now stacked with intention, rather than haste. Bundles of dried fish are tied to ensure their knots will hold through transport inland. Small barrels are rolled into shade so the contents do not warm too quickly. Cloth received from upriver traders is unwrapped briefly, not for inspection, that to allow the sea air to pass through before being folded again. Every action is unhurried, carried out with an awareness that mistakes made late in the day linger longer than those made at dawn. Nearby, the harbor's voices soften. Conversations no longer compete with one another. Instead, they unfold in measured tones, shaped by familiarity rather than urgency. The coastal merchant listens without fully engaging, learning more from cadence than from words. A fisherman's satisfaction reveals itself in silence rather than boasting. A courier's impatience shows in pacing rather than complaint. These small cues guide decisions more effectively than direct questions ever could. With trade largely concluded, attention turns toward preparation. The merchant selects a ledger kept separate from the one used in the morning hours. This book holds summaries rather than details, recording outcomes instead of possibilities. The act of writing here is slower, each line spaced generously, allowing the hand to rest between entries. Numbers are not rushed. Symbols are checked twice. The page itself becomes a quiet companion, absorbing the day without demanding explanation. Beyond the dock, the tide begins its subtle withdrawal. The water lowers almost imperceptibly, revealing darkened stone and patches of seaweed that glisten briefly before drying. The merchant notes this shift without moving closer, already familiar with how the harbor exposes its edges and stages. Certain boats will leave soon to follow the tide outward, while others will remain until morning. This knowledge shapes the final exchanges of the day, determining which agreements must be sealed immediately and which can wait. The coastal merchant steps away from the busiest portion of the dock and moves toward a storage shed set back from the water. Inside, the air is cooler and carries the faint scent of rope and salt-soaked wood. Here, goods destined for longer journeys are arranged with care. Heavier items are placed lower, lighter ones higher, creating balance rather than simply filling space. The merchant adjusts a crate by a finger's width, satisfied only when it sits without strain. Outside, light shifts across the harbor in slow layers. Reflections lengthen, and the water's surface loses some of its earlier brightness. The merchant pauses to observe this change, not out of sentiment, but habit. Light reveals what motion conceals. A damaged hull becomes more visible in angled sun. A loose line catches the eye more easily when shadows stretch. These observations are noted mentally, filed away for future caution. A familiar figure approaches, not to trade, but to speak briefly. The exchange is simple and requires no negotiation. News of inland roads, weather patterns beyond the coast, or the movement of officials travels quietly at this hour. The merchant listens attentively, offering neither agreement nor concern too quickly. Information is weighed later, when it can be placed alongside other fragments gathered throughout the week. As afternoon deepens, the merchant returns to the dock edge one final time. The water is lower now, and the sound of it has changed. Where waves once slapped firmly against the wood, they now murmur and draw back, leaving damp patterns behind. The merchant rests a hand against a post, feeling the coolness seep through the grain. This contact grounds the day, reminding the body of its place within the harbor's cycle. Attention shifts next to tools and materials used throughout the day. A scale is wiped clean and reset, its balance tested with a practiced touch. Measuring rods are returned to their hooks. Twine scraps are gathered and sorted, usable lengths separated from those too short to keep. Nothing is discarded without reason. Waste, like haste, is considered a failure of foresight. The coastal merchant then turns inward, reviewing decisions made earlier. Each agreement is recalled not to question it, but to understand its shape. Which choices relied on instinct? Which required calculation? Patterns emerge over time, and recognizing them strengthens future judgment. This reflection is quiet and personal, requiring no outward expression. Close by, the harbor itself begins to thin. Those without reason to remain drift away toward homes set along the shore or further inland. The remaining figures move with purpose, either securing vessels for the night or preparing to depart with the outgoing tide. The merchant notes who stays and who leaves, understanding that presence carries meaning long after words fade. A gull cries overhead, not sharply, but with a drawn-out call that echoes briefly before dissolving into open air. The sound passes without interruption to thought. It becomes part of the background, as natural and unremarkable as the creak of ropes or the distant splash of oars. The merchant's focus remains steady, unbroken by such signals. With the sun lowering further, the merchant gathers the ledgers and tucks them securely away. One is placed within a waterproof wrap, another inside a wooden chest lined with oilcloth. These small precautions ensure that the day's efforts are preserved against chance. Records matter not for their own sake, but because they allow tomorrow to begin without confusion. The final task of the afternoon involves a slow walk along the length of the dock. The merchant checks each section with practiced eyes, noting loose boards, fraying lines, or shifted weights. Repairs are not made now unless urgent. Instead, needs are acknowledged and scheduled. This restraint preserves energy and maintains rhythm. As shadows lengthen and the harbor settles, the coastal merchant feels no urgency to leave immediately. This pause marks the transition between labor and rest. The day has given what it will, and no effort remains that cannot wait. Standing quietly, the merchant allows the sounds of water and wood to fill the remaining space, closing the afternoon with calm acceptance. When the merchant finally turns away from the dock, the movement is unremarkable and unannounced. The harbor continues without notice, as it always does. The merchant walks casually and follows the worn path that leads inland, boots finding familiar stones without the need for attention. Behind, the harbor continues its slow settling. Ropes creak softly as boats adjust to the tide, and the last light of the day lingers on the water before slipping away. The merchant turns but does not look back for long. What mattered there has already been accounted for, folded away and set aside. The walk through the village is unhurried. Doors stand open to release warmth and quiet voices into the narrow streets. Lamps are being lit one by one, their glow catching on whitewashed walls and the edges of windowsills. The merchant passes without interruption, recognized but not stopped. Another familiar figure moving through the evening routine. As the sounds of the harbor fade, replaced by the softer life of the village, the pace naturally slows. The day's decisions no longer press for attention. What remains is the simple awareness of movement, of ground beneath each step, of the air cooling as the sun sinks fully beyond the horizon. At the edge of the village, the merchant pauses briefly to acknowledge the close of the day. The sea can no longer be seen from here, but its presence remains, steady and unchanged. Tomorrow will bring it back into view soon enough. With that, the merchant continues onward, leaving the dock, the harbor, and the work of the day behind, carrying only the quiet balance that comes from a day allowed to end at its own pace.